Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's video, I'm going to use some Lindys Magical Powders and create some backgrounds, and then I'm going to use them with the new Bold Botanicals stamp set. So if you've never used Magical Powders before, they are pigment powders that come in little jars. A little goes a long way. I like to spread them out with a fan brush and then use a sprayer to make the dyes in the pigment powders come alive. Now, it doesn't necessarily matter if you spray water first or sprinkle the powders and then spray the water. You can just see from what I just did there, they both pretty much work the same way. You do want to make sure that you're working on cardstock that can handle some water. So the first one, I just did a plain background with the different colored powders. Second one, I'm putting a stencil on my paper and then I'm pressing a Versamark pad through it. What I'm going to do then is use a fluffy brush and brush the powders onto that sticky ink. And then I'm going to use a Swiffer cloth to dust off the excess. It's going to create a pattern in my background, and then when I spray the water, it is going to bleed the powders out a little bit, but you still are going to see that pattern on that background. So it creates a really interesting and unique look. The last way I'm going to use the powders on the backgrounds is I'm going to put some of my mixed media heavy stock that I've been using on there, as well as some black watercolor paper. I'm going to put some stencils down and then sprinkle the powders over top of the stencils. Now, when you look at how much powder I have sprinkled on there before I use my water, it doesn't look like very much, but like I said before, a little goes a long way. You just want to sprinkle a little bit, and then once you've got as much or as little powder as you want on there, you're going to use your spray bottle and spray those powders. Let them sit and dry with those stencils on there. Now, you do want to make sure you move those powders out of the way before spraying. You don't want to get water into that bottle. But this is what those backgrounds look like when they're done. So that first one was the plain background. Second one was with the Versamark and the stencil. And then these last two are this background that I've got there drying with the stencil on top of that. So for those last two backgrounds, you can see that the dye seeps underneath the stencil, but you get the concentration of the shimmer within the pattern of the stencil. So this is the Bold Botanical stamp set that I'm going to be using. Once my backgrounds are dry, I'm taking those two plain backgrounds and I'm going to stamp and emboss those images there. This stamp set comes with 4 different images. I'm going to use all of them. I'm going to do 2 on one background with white embossing powder and then 2 on another background with black embossing powder. So I'm double stamping using some Versamark ink. Versamark ink is a nice sticky ink that embossing powder is going to stick to really well. And by double stamping, I can make sure I get as good of an impression as possible. First one I'm going to do is the black embossing powder. Once I've put it on there and tapped off all the excess, I'm using an embossing tool and heating that powder up and melting it. If you've never heat embossed before, you do need an embossing tool to do this. An embossing tool emits heat to melt the powder where it is. You can't do it with a blow dryer. It's a question that I have gotten often. A blow dryer will blow air, it'll dry the ink and just blow the powder off. So you definitely want to be using an embossing tool that just emits heat. So my second one here, I'm repeating the same process, but this time I'm going to be using some white embossing powder. I am double stamping with that Versamark ink, and then I'm going to put that white embossing powder on there, tap off the excess, and I'm going to heat emboss it with my embossing tool. Now, this Bold Botanical stamp set is unique in the fact that when you are stamping and embossing, you are actually stamping and embossing the background around the flowers instead of the flowers themselves. Often flower stamps, you're actually stamping the flowers or an outline of the flowers, but this one's a little bit different because you are stamping the background. So it gives it a really cool look, and because of that, with these magical backgrounds, you get flowers that are multicolored, and I think it looks really, really cool, especially the fact that they also have a bit of a shimmer to them. It gives them a really interesting and unique look. Once I have these embossed, I'm going to cut my cardstocks down. I want to leave just a tiny little bit of an edge of that Magicals background around it. I don't want to cut right up to the embossing. And then I'm going to create mats for them. For the black ones, I'm going to do black mats, and for the white ones, I'm going to do white mats. And the mats that I cut for around them are just 1/8 of an inch bigger than them, so they've got a really narrow mat around them. It just gives it a little bit of a different look. You can make your mat for your pieces as big or as small as you'd like. Once those mats are cut, I'm going to cut 4 card bases at 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches, and then I'm going to score them in half at 4 1/4 inches and burnish that fold in with my Teflon bone folder. I'm using some Distress Collage medium to glue all my layers together. And after I've put my layer down, I like to hold it down with an acrylic block just to hold it in place and free up my hands to glue the next piece. I'm also going to do the same process with the images and the mats around them. I'm going to glue them down to the mat, and then I'm going to put them under my acrylic block to hold it in place while I glue the next one. It usually only takes a few seconds for that glue to have dried enough that it's going to stick to glue down the next layer. So you don't have to wait very long for this. Once my mats and my backgrounds are done being glued to the card, I'm going to glue that image piece to the front of the card. I'm centering it, and then I'm putting it a little bit high so that I can add a sentiment to the bottom. I have 4 cards here. I'm only going to put sentiments on 2 of them, one of the white and one of the black for this video. I'm going to leave 2 of them blank so that way I can customize a sentiment if or when I'm going to use that card. It's always nice to have some blank cards so that you can customize sentiments for them. For the sentiment, I'm going to use a thanks die, and I still have one Magicals background. I'm going to use that background to cut for the main part of the thanks part, and then I'm going to use either black and white cardstock depending on which card I'm using for the shadow part of the thanks. So I'm just going to cut that smaller just to make it easier to die cut, and then I am laying each piece on my die and putting it through my die cutting machine. I will use my Distress Collage medium to glue those 2 pieces together, and then an acrylic block to hold it down while the glue dries, just to make sure that everything is nice and flat while I die cut my next one. For die cut, I can use that same Distress Collage medium to put on the back of those die cuts to glue them to the front of the cards. And once again, I'll hold them down with an acrylic block just to make sure that they're nice and flat while they're drying. I'm so in love with this Bold Botanical stamp on these magical backgrounds. I can't decide which is my favorite, whether it's the one with the black or the one with the white. Please share in the comments what is your favorite. I'm really curious to know. So these are the final cards. Again, I've got 2 of them without sentiments, one each of the white and the black, and then I did sentiments for one of the white ones and one of the black ones. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. I hope you have a fantastic day.